Yeah, I don't believe in destiny. I just do what's best for me. Don't listen to my enemies, they're just full of jealousy. Yeah.
A Jedi like Tera Sinube had been studying the criminal underworld for his entire life, and he's able to point out a few markets where this thief most likely would try to sell Ahsoka's lightsaber. The two immediately head for District G17, one of the many thousands of slums located in the Coruscant underworld. They approach a dingy-looking food stand staffed by a sketchy-looking Corran. Never trust those squiddy bastards, they're always up to no good. Ahsoka asks the Corran if he has any lightsabers to sell. In my opinion, Ahsoka is clearly acting like a narc right now, but luckily she is a teenager and she's being accompanied by an old man, so they don't really seem like police officers. And the Corran must be desperate to move the Jedi lightsaber. It clearly will attract a lot of unwanted trouble, and no one fears the Jedi more than criminal scum. But the Corran's opening price for the lightsaber is quite steep, 20,000 credits. That's enough to buy an entire land speeder. But of course, Ahsoka, as usual, doesn't have much tact and immediately reveals she's a Jedi. Luckily, that's enough to scare the Corran into revealing the location of the thief. The two Jedi track the thief to a nearby hostel. Notice all of the artificial light in the lower levels of Coruscant. It's not just there for nighttime, it's there for all the time. It's even rumored that in the deeper and more primitive parts of Coruscant, the inhabitants consider the sun and daylight a myth. Anything lower than the first few dozen layers of the Undercity didn't have a day and night cycle. Anyway, the two Jedi are able to use the Force inside the hostel to find the room where their thief is staying, but unfortunately they find that the lightsaber has already exchanged hands to an individual known as Knack Movers, a feared Trandoshan assassin. Usually illegal weapons, especially larger shipments, would eventually go through an organization known as the Black Suns. The Black Suns, like most of the criminal organizations in the galaxy, like to dabble in everything from spice to slave trafficking. But they mainly specialized in two things: providing muscle and weapons smuggling. The two businesses kind of go hand in hand. Given the specialized nature of the lightsaber, however, it makes sense that an assassin would get its hands on it. This was a special item, and most likely Knack Movers was willing to pay much more than, let's say, a Black Suns arms merchant. Ahsoka and Master Sinube continued their search for the lightsaber and traveled to the upper side of Happy Land, one of the many districts in Coruscant. Having her lightsaber fall into the hands of an assassin or a murderer is a very troubling thought for Ahsoka, especially if bodies start turning up with cauterized wounds. But when they arrive, the Trandoshan is found dead in his apartment. A Terrellian Jango jumper and her partner in crime now have possession of the lightsaber, and the chase continues. Terrellian Jango jumpers were just one of many interesting species on Coruscant. These blue humanoids had extremely powerful muscles and bone structure, which allowed them to run at superhuman speeds and jump extremely long distances. They could easily rival a talented Jedi's own Force abilities. Happy Land was still technically a part of the underworld, but it had large skyscrapers, most of which reached the surface of the planet. There were huge gaps in between the buildings here, which made it a perfect place for a Jango jumper to evade less gifted pursuers. At this point, the Coruscant security forces are called in as backup. They have access to an assortment of vehicles, which allow them to move quickly around the underworld. This included the Panther Police Interceptor. These were kind of similar to flying cop cars from Blade Runner. They were small enough to filter through buildings and had a top speed of around 220 miles per hour. The Underworld Police also use speeder bikes like the BARC Speeder. The police use these vehicles to patrol the incredibly confusing traffic lanes of Coruscant. Although all speeders can fly using anti-grav technology, they couldn't just fly anywhere they wanted to. That would make the roads incredibly chaotic. People would die all the time. So instead, there's a very complex 3D road grid that runs at different levels and vectors. All of this was further controlled by the traffic division of the Coruscant Security Force. Fortunately, the two criminals managed to get away from the complicated grid of roads in the Undercity, but just momentarily because Master Sinube had managed to place a tracker on one of them, and they followed the criminals to a regional train station. Maglevs that ran on repulsors crisscrossed the planet, and it was one of the quickest ways and cheapest ways to disappear onto the other side of the planet. After one final chase, the thieves are caught, and Ahsoka manages to get her lightsaber back, and we finish our little tour of one of the most fascinating cities in Star Wars. Like I've always said, I wish Star Wars 1313 was never canceled, and I really do hope that the future Fallen Jedi video game, or even the Mandalorian TV show, will have us visit Coruscant once again. Never has there been a background as rich and ripe for discovery. So there you have it, guys. As you know, I always love it when any Star Wars property goes into Coruscant and the Undercity. This was a quick glimpse at what the underworld was like and how the local security forces worked. In this episode, we'll be looking at the world of Mandalore and the complicated battle for the future and soul of the Mandalorian people. We're relatively different from the legendary Mandalorians older fans are used to. The Mandalorians of old were a great tribe of space warriors whose culture revolved around honor and combat. Thousands of years of constant warfare naturally took a toll on the Mandalorians and on their world. During the Clone Wars period, Duchess Satine Kryze sits on the throne. Just decades earlier, Satine Kryze's faction, called the New Mandalorians, had fought a devastating civil war against a faction of old-school Mandalorians who wanted to continue on the warrior traditions of their people. Ultimately, Satine's faction won. Having studied her people's past, she believed that pacifism was the only way her people could survive. With the start of the Clone Wars, the Mandalorians took a stance of neutrality, refusing to enter either side of the war. Their actions inspired many other planets, and together these worlds formed the Council of Neutral Systems, with Duchess Satine as their leader. For the most part, the Mandalorians had kept the violence of the Clone Wars away from their planet. But the Republic Senate was wary that the Mandalorians were going to use their influence over the Council of Neutral Systems to break off from the Republic, as the Separatists had done before. And so the Jedi Order, at the behest of the Senate, sends Obi-Wan Kenobi to Mandalore to find out exactly what is going on. Obi-Wan Kenobi had originally visited Mandalore with Qui-Gon Jinn in a mission to keep Satine Kryze safe during the Civil War. What most people didn't know was that Obi-Wan and Satine had grown quite close during that mission. Qui-Gon Jinn wasn't exactly the most orthodox Jedi Master and probably looked the other way as their young romance began to bud. Upon meeting the Prime Minister and Duchess, they both parrot the same words. Mandalore is loyal and things are going great on their world. The Mandalorians are a peaceful kind of people. And all the big bad warriors their culture was known for had been sent to the moon, where they had died off. Of course, Obi-Wan Kenobi has had his own experience with Mandalorians and is quite skeptical. And he turns out to be right. While touring the city together in private, Satine, away from her advisors, admits that the renegade Mandalorians Obi-Wan had encountered were most likely the Death Watch, a group of super violent but also arguably a lot cooler Mandalorians that lived by the old ways. Most Mandalorians had assumed that after the Civil War they had just disappeared. While Satine is trying to assure Obi-Wan Kenobi that they're only a small nuisance, an explosion interrupts one of the latest attempts by the Death Watch to destabilize the Duchess's rule. After surviving the attack, Satine and Obi-Wan ventured to Mandalore's moon, Concordia, in order to look for signs of Death Watch. The two are greeted upon landing by Governor Pre Vizsla. While Satine is entertained by the governor, Obi-Wan goes on a fact-finding mission to check out one of the nearby mining facilities. The Mandalorian commandos he had encountered before were all wearing the legendary Beskar armor, something that can only be created here on Mandalore or on its moon, Concordia. The mines and factories were supposed to be closed, but the one Obi-Wan enters seems to be functional and is producing Mandalorian armor. And before he can report his findings, he's ambushed and knocked out. Luckily, he still has his comlink on, and he contacts Satine for help once he wakes up again. And she arrives just in time to save him from being smelted. But now the jig is up, the Death Watch is alerted to their presence, and Satine and Obi-Wan finally come face to face with their leader, Governor Pre Vizsla. You see, the governor was from a famous clan, a clan that still followed the old ways. Vizsla had been contacted by Count Dooku, who had promised to support a Death Watch takeover of the planet. Vizsla goes toe-to-toe with Obi-Wan Kenobi using the legendary Darksaber, a lightsaber that once belonged to a Mandalorian Jedi and now was a sign of Mandalorian leadership. Obi-Wan survives the encounter and manages to escape with the Duchess, but now things grow more complicated. Pre Vizsla and his Death Watch manage to escape before the authorities arrive, and there's a strong indication that the Separatists were backing Pre Vizsla, which means the Republic might now have to get involved in the affairs of neutral Mandalore. Duchess Satine must venture back to Coruscant to plead her case in front of the Republic Senate. Obi-Wan Kenobi and Anakin Skywalker, along with an detachment of clones, will provide security along the way. They know that most likely someone else will make an attempt on the Duchess, and we're on high alert. While Duchess Satine has her little sleepover party with other world leaders who also want to remain neutral, terrifying killer droids activate in the hold of her ship and start killing everyone. Technically called probe killers, These spider-like droids were especially programmed for assassination missions. Satine Kryze's pursuit of pacifism was definitely admirable, and perhaps if she were just a mere activist and not the ruler of Mandalore, her views would be harmless. But clearly, pacifism doesn't really work all that well when your enemies are trying to kill you. And once again, it's up to the Jedi and clones to keep those unwilling to fight themselves safe. Anakin and the clones try their best to keep the spider droids below deck, but one manages to make it up to the dining room where Satine is. Although Obi-Wan Kenobi is able to quickly dispatch the large droid, what he didn't realize was that these probe killers were actually carriers for hundreds of smaller killer droids. It's basically everyone's greatest fear when it comes to killing spiders. You don't want to kill a pregnant spider because it might just release hundreds of little tiny spider eggs. Luckily, Satine Kryze is carrying a deactivator, a specially made ion weapon that takes out droids fairly easily. With the threat defeated, the Jedi must now find who smuggled these killer assassin droids on board. Most likely, there are more Mandalorians who are loyal to Death Watch. Obi-Wan suspects it's one of the senators on board. The box containing the assassin droids had official Republic stamps on them. Obi-Wan comes up with a quick plan. They recovered one live mini assassin droid and will hold it next to each of the senators on board. The mini droids are programmed to kill everyone besides the individual who smuggled it on board in the first place. That's how they find out that the traitor is none other than Senator Tal Merrik of Kalevala, a planet in the Mandalorian system. In the scuffle that breaks out, Merrik manages to take Satine as hostage and heads to the bridge where he murders the entire crew and calls for reinforcements. While Anakin and the clones fight off the Separatist borders, Obi-Wan Kenobi confronts the traitor, and in a moment of complete honesty and vulnerability, Obi-Wan admits to Satine Kryze his love for her. Had she asked, he would have left the Jedi to be by her side. But then Anakin comes out of nowhere and pokes Senator Merrik with his lightsaber. Classic Anakin. The Duchess makes it all the way to Coruscant, but her troubles are only just beginning. The Death Watch continues to grow in size, but they're not large enough yet to take over the planet, especially if they have to do it by force. Instead, they have to win the hearts and minds of the people, something that would be relatively easy to do if the Republic invaded and they opposed them. And that's exactly what Chancellor Palpatine wants to do. The Death Watch was clearly a threat, most likely just a pawn in his own Sith game. But for now, they were an ally of the Separatists and a threat to the Republic. Satine Kryze realizes she must keep the clone troopers away from Mandalore in order to stop any further escalation in the conflict there. But then Palpatine hits hard with a message from her own deputy minister who states a civil war has already started and that Satine Kryze was trying to hide that from the rest of the galaxy. The minister had been a close friend and his accusations became a shock to Satine. And to make matters worse, the deputy minister was no longer available for explaining what he had accused Satine Kryze for because he had recently died in a bombing on Kalevala. During the break in the Senate session before the Republic votes on sending force to Mandalore, the Duchess's speeder is sabotaged, her loyal bodyguards and drivers sacrifice themselves and bring her to safety before the speeder smashes into the side of the building. This was the work of another Death Watch assassin. But unfortunately, there's no sign of foul play, and Chancellor Palpatine himself rules out any criminal activity. To make matters worse, while meeting with Palpatine about the accident, the Senate had pushed forward the vote and had voted in favor of intervention on Mandalore. Clone troopers would leave for Mandalore the next morning. Satine, desperate to find out what had happened, goes into the Undercity by herself to talk to a Mandalorian contact she has in the Ministry of Intelligence. The Mandalorian had gotten his hands on the original holo from Deputy Minister, and it looks like the version Palpatine had played for the Senate had been altered. Shortly after exchanging the disc, the intelligence agent is killed by a Death Watch sniper. A nearby police probe registers Satine as the killer. She has proof that she needs to turn over to the Republic, but she's now a wanted criminal. Oh, and that Death Watch assassin is also after her as well. Satine can only turn to one man, someone who will never betray her. Her boo, Obi-Boo Kenobi. Satine handles Obi-Wan the disc for safekeeping. But before they split up, the assassin tries to kill Satine with a grenade. Very subtle and practical in a crowded city. Fortunately for the assassin, he didn't count on a Jedi being present and barely manages to escape. Satine eventually turns herself in at the Senate complex, allowing Obi-Wan to freely enter without notice, so that he can get the data disc to Senator Padme Amidala, who shows the real message from the Deputy Minister of Kalevala, and it's quite different. Not only did his deputy minister show faith in the Duchess's ability to steer the Mandalorian clear of a civil war, he directly warns against the Republican intervention. With this new development, the Senate once again casts its vote against the invasion. Crisis is once again averted. Death Watch does not have enough resources to hold Mandalore without support of its people. So there you have it, guys. As you can see, Mandalorian politics and history is a relatively confusing one. This is a story arc that we will probably return to once again later on in the war. Chapter 10, Fett's Revenge. Jango Fett was one of the most feared bounty hunters in the galaxy. Legends say that during the Battle of Galadron, Fett killed multiple Jedi with his bare hands. It's also said that Count Dooku had been the leader of the Jedi forces at the battle and had been so impressed with the bounty hunter that he selected him for the template for the clone army. Fett was an ordinary human being, but he was extremely skilled and talented when it came to combat. While the average Jedi is more talented than the average human, Jango existed in that small area where the most skilled humans surpassed the more average Jedi. Mace Windu, however, was not only above average for a Jedi, he was probably one of the most talented swordsmen in the entire Jedi Order, and therefore the galaxy. Jango never really had a chance against him. And being the terrible father he was, Jango brought his son/clone Boba Fett to the execution/battle, and the boy was there to witness his progenitor's beheading. And because Boba is a Fett, he's not gonna just let that go. He's determined to get his revenge from Mace Windu. I know it's a pretty un-Jedi thing to do, but Mace Windu probably should have murdered the little bastard when he had a chance. You see, Boba had the perfect cover. He looked like every clone trooper in the clone army, well, every young cadet at least. He used his appearance to infiltrate the Venator Star Destroyer Endurance as a part of the Clone Youth Brigade. Jedi Generals Anakin Skywalker and Mace Windu were on their way to rendezvous with the Endurance for a bit of R&R. Boba fits right in with the rest of the young cadets, but he definitely seems a bit more talented and independent. In Legends, we know that the less altered clones retained more of Fett's skill and aggressiveness in battle. Boba is a completely unaltered version of Jango, whereas all the clone cadets are bred to be more obedient and also potentially suffer from some degradation when it comes to motor skills and ability. Once the Jedi Generals arrive on board, they brief the young cadets, allowing Boba to make visual confirmation that Mace Windu is in fact on board. Boba manages to slip away and booby-trap the Jedi Master's room with a classic laser tripwire bomb. Fortunately for Mace Windu, he's called off for a meeting at the last second before he enters his room and avoids getting his legs blown off. But a clone trooper who is sent in his place isn't as lucky.
Well, they liked me and enthusiastically recommended me for hire, according to the director of Peacemaker. Yay! I won the popularity contest.
Good job.
It wasn't against anybody else. It was just a yay or nay for me, but.
Yeah.
And I
If
think,
against someone else, it probably would have been harder.
well, yeah. Ah, but I sweat so much during these things. Now, like my dress is soaked in the armpits.
You worked for years and you still sweat during interviews?
Yeah. I get nervous. I get nervous and sweaty anytime I feel like I'm super focused or put on the spot.
The entire ship goes on alert as a result of the explosion. Boba must act quickly. It's only a matter of time before they figure out that he doesn't belong on that ship. Running out of options, Boba contacts the bounty hunter he's working with, Aurra Sing, for advice. Sing tells Boba to blow the reactor and take out the entire ship. Boba is hesitant at first about this idea. He doesn't want to harm the clones on board, just Mace Windu. After Jango had lost his head, the clones were basically the closest thing he had to a family. But Sing pressures Boba into destroying the entire ship, and so he heads to the reactor where he stuns a guard with a blaster and then shoots the reactor control panels, which quickly destabilizes the engines. The Jedi are almost sucked out into vacuum in the ensuing explosion, but manage to make it off the ship in starfighters. Meanwhile, Boba rejoins the other cadets and leaves the ship on one of the escape pods. But before that escape pod can rendezvous with the other pods, Boba sabotages his vessel, allowing Slave 1, piloted by Aurra Sing, to pick him up. He still has a mission to finish. Meanwhile, the Jedi and clones search for survivors in the crash site. Admiral Killian and the command crew have managed to land the Endurance on the nearby planet of Vancor, mostly intact. Once inside the crash site, they find a dead clone trooper who seems to have been killed after the crash. The Jedi surmise it must be the assassins who have come aboard the ship to verify that Mace Windu was in fact dead. The Jedi decide to split up and head to the bridge while the droids search the rest of the ship for survivors. The droids quickly realized they weren't alone. The planet was infested with terrifying Gundarks, powerful six-limbed monsters. While Mace Windu's droid is ripped apart, R2-D2 manages to escape somehow intact. Meanwhile, on the bridge, the two Jedi spot Jango Fett's helmet lying in the wreckage, an obvious trap, but the Jedi trigger it anyway. So much for their force powers being able to perceive threats. Skywalker and Windu manage to survive the explosion thanks to the older Jedi's quick thinking, but now they're both trapped beneath the wreckage. Meanwhile, Boba and his team of bounty hunters watch the explosion from afar. They had reached the bridge before the Jedi and taken the surviving crew along with Admiral Killian hostage. These Republic hostages would fetch a good bounty with Count Dooku, and would also serve as bait to draw the Jedi in. So while Bossk watches over the clones, the rest of the bounty hunters head towards the crash site to get the Jedi's bodies. R2-D2, however, manages to reach his master first, but he's unable to remove the debris from on top of him, and instead heads back to the starfighters to call for help. But before he's able to get off planet, the bounty hunters arrive and chase him in Slave One. They think one of the Jedi is trying to escape. In the ensuing dogfight, R2-D2 manages to escape, but the fighter's communication array is damaged, forcing R2-D2 to enter hyperspace and travel all the way to Coruscant to warn the Temple about what was happening. Ahsoka and Plo Koon immediately leave Coruscant and rescue the stranded Jedi just in time. But Mace Windu's ordeal is not over yet. The bounty hunters still have Republic hostages, which they can use as leverage. Their leader, Aurra Sing, is a ruthless killer and willing to go to extreme lengths to get what she wants. Boba, who is still kind of just an innocent kid, finds the whole situation distasteful. The bounty hunters send a transmission and demand that Mace Windu come face them, or else they'll execute all of their hostages. To show they're serious, they shoot Commander Pons in the head. Boba is unable to shoot him, but Aurora steps in and does it anyway. Commander Pons had been a veteran of Geonosis and served alongside Mace Windu since the beginning of the war. Now, Windu and Skywalker are still recovering. They're far too injured to go pursue Sing. So Plo Koon and Ahsoka Tano take over the investigation instead. They travel to the Coruscant underworld in order to find out more information about the whereabouts of Aurra Sing. They wander into a cantina and overhear that the bounty hunters had headed to Florrum. The pirate Hondo Ohnaka had built a base on the small planet. Aurra had hoped that Hondo would help them out. Unfortunately, the pirate refuses to do so, but does allow Aurra to stay at his cantina. Plo Koon and Ahsoka Tano shortly arrive on the planet and demand that Aurra Sing release the hostages. Aurra is ready, however, and has the hostages removed from the location. If the Jedi try anything funny, Bossk will execute them remotely. The bounty hunters are dismayed to find that Plo Koon and Ahsoka had been sent to recover the hostages instead of Mace Windu.
Say goodbye to the knife that you sharpened.